Thank you. Good morning. This is the first time we're presenting this outside Southeast Asia, so I'll tell you a little bit about UOB. We're a Southeast Asian bank, assets of about 280 billion US dollars. We make about 3 billion US dollars in profit every year, and we are in 19 countries, have about 500 branches. But our retail business is primarily in ASEAN, the countries of Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So today I'm going to share with you the work that we've done in the past 2 years to launch a millennial digital bank. But I would like to start with a question first, and that question, as you can see on the board, is which country spends the most time a day online via their mobile? Any takers? Anyone think it's France? Anybody? Any French? Anyone from France here? Singapore? No, that's not correct. Spain is also wrong. So the French, obviously, they have much better things to do. They only spend 1 hour. The Spanish also have better things to do, like probably partying or drinking or talking to friends. The Singaporeans a little bit better too, but it's the Thais and the Indonesians that spend the most time. And actually, ASEAN leads this globally, almost 4 hours per day, mostly because of countries like Thailand and Indonesia. Obviously, they have very large populations. Now, why is this so? Right? So one of the reasons, of course, is that ASEAN is very young, and you see that 60% of ASEAN is under 35 years old. Now, that doesn't really seem very important until I tell you that that's 400 million customers, and it's the single largest group of millennials outside India and China. Secondly, they are very mobile because they skip kind of the internet generation and the hardwire generation. They've moved straight to the mobile. So in 2017, just over 50% had a smartphone. And in 2020, just 3 years later, it's going to rise to 65%. Again, doesn't seem to mean much until I tell you there's 100 million customers more. So there is a big revolution happening in these countries as we speak. And as you know, the price of a smartphone now could be as low as 50 US dollars and going lower. So the day when actually you can say that all of ASEAN is mobile online is actually not that far away. And one of the other facts here is that 1 in every 2 working adults is still unbanked. So you see, as a melting pot of digital and financial inclusion coming together, it is probably the most relevant in the Southeast Asia context. And finally, 70% of middle-income ASEAN, they will browse online before they buy at the point of sale, or they'll just browse online and buy. So they're heavily influenced by the mobile internet. So when we started, 2017 when we started, the first thing we did was to pretend we didn't know anything so that we could build a bank from scratch. Now that's much harder to do than it sounds, because the moment we go in the room, we'll start brainstorming usually about products and what kind of interest rates you're going to offer and so on and so forth. So we spent a lot of time doing ethnographic research. I think we interviewed quantitatively a few thousand customers, ethnographic about 30 plus per country. We went to their houses, went to their home, went to their office. Some of them played the guitar for us, showed us their anime collection. So it's really trying to immerse ourselves and understand them a lot better. There was this lady that my team calls 50 baht beauty, and what she would do to save was every time she saw a 50 baht note, she would just pull it one side and keep it. And she thought the 50 baht note was very beautiful. That's why they nicknamed her 50 baht beauty. We also looked at a lot of the European banks. We visited mBank, and mBank was the original internet banking bank. So we looked at what they did and what the learnings they had. And of course, a lot of the digital innovators, not only in the West, but also in China. So if you had to design a millennial bank in ASEAN, what would you do? Anyone here? If you give us a good answer, then maybe we can hire you. What would you do? Anyone? Okay, messaging, social media. Anyone else? Any suggestions for us? So this was the conclusion of a lot of work around what the value proposition should be. These 5 things that we crystallize. Number 1, the understanding that the millennials are very different. They are very different from their prior generation in the sense of what they value. So a lot of them will tell you that they don't want to really own stuff, they want to experience stuff. Right? And later we'll show you a brand campaign that harnesses this from an emotive perspective, because we wanted to create something beyond just the functional benefits of a bank. Of course, the second one is very obvious. Everything's on the go. And for some of us, we'll think, well, the screen is too small to do this kind of stuff. There's no such thing for them. There's no such thing as the screen is too small for something. A lot of times they told us they want a friend, not a bank, right? Because banks are very formal, very complicated, use all kinds of very complex legal terms that they don't understand. So they are looking for a friend. Not so much from the customer perspective. I think the top 3 are from the customer perspective. But it's also very important as you do this, you think of how do you juxtaposition both the customer and your business model. So the last 2 are more about the business model. It's about growing a customer and constantly learning and personalizing the experience for them. And the final one is around using data to anticipate what they're going to need and do it before they even realize they want it. So these were the 5 guiding principles that went into the design of the bank. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how we crystallize the business model. Now, if you ask bank customers what they want to apply fuss-free. And most digital banks just focus on that, apply fuss-free. And then they want to bank and pay. Bank, usually they want credit, and they want to pay without friction. They don't tell you much of anything else. If you ask more than this, it'll be okay. The credit card should be free. It should have lots of benefit. You should not charge me. There'll be no fees, right? Because they don't care whether you make money or not. So this is as much as you get in any kind of research, which I have found in my 17 years career in banking totally useless, because they just don't tell you anything that's useful. But when they transact, they do produce a lot of data. And you heard many of the speakers yesterday, actually in the fintech, the past 2 days before, they generate a lot of data which we now store, so that if somebody comes 5 years later and say, well, I didn't make this transaction, we can actually go back and say, well, you did. There's a record here saying that you did make this transaction. And that's all we do with it. We just archive it. In some jurisdictions, the regulator forces you to archive it for a certain minimum number of years. But the digital banks of tomorrow, I think, will be very different. We'll be looking at how we can make that data meaningful, how we can then pump it into an insight engine and produce insights that allow us to personalize the entire experience. And when you have insights, then you can engage. And engage customers, buy more from you and transact more, creating a virtuous cycle of data and engagement. And that's what the digital bank, we believe, is going to be about going forward. And every single bank, we think around the world, is going to focus on this business model. Now let me go through each one of them in a little bit more detail. Apply is very important, and we have what we call Center of Excellence just working on it. And the reason for that is that if you can't authenticate, how do I know you are who you say you are, online, you can't open shop in a digital bank. And ASEAN is particularly complicated because every single country has a different jurisdiction, has a different mechanism for authentication. In Singapore, we use a user ID PIN and second token. So it's all electronic. In Malaysia, they still require a physical signature, right? But Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia have national ID cards with chips. So we are forced to use that because they have no centralized database available to read the chip. Now, when you read the chip, you need a machine to read the chip, right? You need a piece of equipment. So in Thailand, we deployed this year and officially launched on the 1st of March, 300 plus kiosks. And these kiosks, simply you slot in your ID card, you put your finger, you walk away. So the experience is good. It's a little bit of friction, but we are waiting for the national ID infrastructure that is going to use facial recognition. Now, it's quite complex because they have decided to use peer-to-peer facial recognition, where the photos are IAL 2.3 standard, but you have to build it from scratch. So we think it's going to take some time. So we decided to launch the digital bank with a little bit of friction in onboarding, right? That is still acceptable for us to begin this journey around data. And Vietnam still requires wet signature. But in the next 3 years, all these countries, the regulator will move, they will morph. It's just that the methods are all different. And so the modularity around it has been very challenging. And we have a team just focused on this because the regulator will wake up every week and decide on the different scheme they want to do, causing our project to go haywire. Now let me demonstrate a little bit on Bank and Pay. So we wanted to make the app really simple. And because we were dealing with millennials, and millennials have very simple needs, they needed a transaction account, a savings account, and then a credit card. You see what we did with the interface, and later, if I have time, I'm actually going to do a live demo. Always a little bit dangerous, but if the Wi-Fi works, I checked earlier, it will access my account in Thailand. So this uses the latest PFM. PFM 1, you had to almost do like Excel spreadsheets. And when we talked to mBank, only 5% of their customers ever used it. Banking just isn't so interesting. So PFM 3, it just does everything for you automatically. Right? So for example, if you take a trip somewhere, it knows you're not in your hometown, it will gather all the expenses and automatically show this to you. But what about service, right? Service is the consistent complaint. Every single research we did indicates that customers just hated calling call centers. So what could we do, right? And this is a mono-channel bank. It's not omni-channel, right? The nice thing of mono-channel is that you can really get cost savings. Anything you do in omni-channel is very hard to get cost savings because they are often not replaced. So chat is the main way to get service here. And how we did it was, really integrating the technologies and making it seamless. And these are two examples to illustrate the power of where it can go. And I'm very confident that in 3 years' time, the majority of our service will be effectively done on chat. Sound? Something wrong with the sound, I guess. So the whole thing's integrated together. So it's a very simple example, but think about this, right? In the omni-channel world, you can't do this. When you call the call center, you have to repeat everything you say because it's very hard to find an analog section of the file that says what you said. And most call center agents, because of the kind of repetitive work they do, they actually don't transcribe your call properly. And the indexing and finding it is actually very, very tough. But look how easy it is when everything is on text. Now, you started to transact. Now we need to make the data meaningful, right? So all of you create data every day. So we collect that data, right? This could be a transaction at a merchant. We store it, and we store it almost real time. We enrich it. Most of you, since we're in Spain, would know that actually Inditex owns Zara. But if you shop at Zara and it says Inditex and you forgot that Inditex owns Zara, then you might accuse your spouse of using your card and making an unauthorized transaction without telling you. So we can actually clean it up, and we can clean up universally as an example of some of the enrichment that we can do and the categorization that we can do to make the things meaningful. So data is quite useless until you categorize it, and by categorizing it, make it a lot more powerful. And then with this, we can then personalize the whole experience, right? So you've got Johnny on your left. He's 26, a computer programmer. He's young, so he wants to live life to the fullest. You've got Pauline on the right. She's married, 31, 2 kids, and she's by nature conservative. So you can now split up the kind of messages you give them. Obviously, he's young. He's looking for party opportunities. She's looking more for family. Might be the birthday. I want to share the birthday with the family. He's on some kind of iTunes, Spotify subscription. She may have shopped at somewhere for the first time, and because she's conservative, she's wondering, did I actually make this transaction? He's regularly saving for his mom, Sally, but may forget occasionally. And with the insights, you know who forgot to pay you and who you forgot to pay. She's trying to save for a down payment for a house. So you can personalize the entire experience. And the last leg of it, when we engage, we've built something called an engagement lab. Now, a lot of banks have labs, but I worked in a technology company before, and most financial institution labs are actually nonsense. Because actually when you go there, the demo doesn't work, and actually they don't do anything valuable. This lab is very different. Later you'll see that the app actually is the lab. The app is the physical lab, and these are just people. They are doing engagement experiments on customers. And every customer has an engagement index. So we know whether an engagement experiment on a customer is raising their engagement index or lowering their engagement index. So this is just a bunch of people where we try and break down the departments, because departments are the worst enemy of good customer experience. Because each department try and optimize for themselves, but the customer is looking across departments. So we're trying to break down the barriers, and every single country that has a digital bank will set up an engagement lab. Okay, at this stage, I'm going to try and do a live demo, and hopefully it works. It's a little bit slow because the servers are in Singapore. So bear with it, and if the Wi-Fi is working properly, I think we should be able to get it up. Okay, so it's a very different design. This part is a little bit slow because of the latency going back and forth. I don't know why it doesn't recognize. Okay, now it does. So we are the only ones that use the English version because obviously it's in Thai. So we just use English for demo. So now the important thing for you to think of, right, is this part at the top is the bank and pay part. It's the part you want to make frictionless. And this part at the bottom is the engagement piece. And you heard a lot of speakers talk about this, right? You want to remove friction from the top, but increase engagement at the bottom. So because of the way it's designed, it's actually very, very simple, because when you want to pay, you don't have to specify from, because obviously this is the account. And you can only do that when it's very simple. When you have a lot more accounts, like in a digital banking scenario, you have to veer towards the most complex customer, which makes it difficult. Now you have all the stuff that's very difficult to do, like set ATM PIN. That's a very tough thing to do. If you forget your ATM PIN, it's a nightmare. A lot of the feedback indicated they wanted to control their withdrawal and spending limits. So that's how the feedback ties back to the entire banking service. I won't spend a lot more time on this because this is, you just make it more and more and more frictionless over time. Now, the interesting thing is this part at the bottom. Everything you see here can be tailored to a customer of one. And that's where we want to reach eventually, right? Maybe, several hops from today, we'll reach a situation where you can actually do a customer one. Now, I'm not really Thai, so I don't spend a lot in Thailand, and it's taking a bit of time to pull that data in. But as you can see, we will, in this room, we will all have different transactions. So each one of these screens for all of us will be different. So this is actually the first step to a one-to-one relationship. Actually, you can think much further than that, because for those of you that have an account with a bank that don't have a credit card, guess what? You still have a credit card menu. Why is that? Right? They should be able to tailor the entire menu for you. So actually, we are pretty backward as an industry, and there's a lot we can do to improve that. So this entire piece is a combination of insights from an engine called Personetics that we use, plus you can do stuff with, obviously, communication and marketing, right? You can collect information from the customer and you can tailor it. So I think we might have a bit of time on the game. Yes. So we designed this kind of an interesting experiment. Actually, the Singaporean millennials hated it. They just said, no, we don't need any help to save. But the Thais, because the Thais, they're very big on this kind of stuff, so they really loved it. And here you can actually add more money and the city will become larger. So I've got only six baht more, so I think if I add, you can actually see the city increase and get bigger. And yes, we don't make the city smaller if you withdraw the money out. We leave the city as it is. So this is an experiment, and we're continuing to experiment. And the nice thing about digital is that you get a very good response, right? You can tell if a customer is happy with it. In fact, we are planning to look at click stream. So if he spends a lot of time looking at it when the city tops up, then you know that he's getting the satisfaction. Now, chatbot was really tough. I had to call David Sosna, the CEO of Personetics, to completely rewrite the chatbot, because Thai, we later found out, is the worst and most difficult language in the world. So we almost abandoned Personetics because their NLP engine wasn't working. This is still pretty rudimentary in the sense that we still have a lot of live chat agents because we want to provide good service from the beginning. But you see the power of being able to repetitively learn and get better and better and better. So we can just ask it something simple like, how can I pay my card? So you can click on this, and then it will bring you the information you need in terms of how you can pay. The instructions are all there. And every week, we look at some of the calls they have gone through that they can't answer, and then it's a continuous improvement process. At first, you expected that it's going to be quite dumb, and therefore, we have a lot more live chat agents, and the trigger to live chat is much faster initially, so that you still provide a very good level of service. So can we switch back? This is the kind of functional part of the bank. We spend a lot of time on this. We spend most of the money given to us on engagement. Onboarding is important because obviously if you don't have onboarding, you can't do anything. But if you onboard and it's exactly the same experience, then what have you done? Because most of us will pay a customer to switch. We've made it very easy to sign up, given him an incentive, and then the experience is exactly the same. So this is the beginning, we feel, of a new model of bank. And to us, it's the first practical implementation of a lot of the theory that you hear put together as kind of a stage zero bank that we believe is the right blueprint for the future. But the biggest issue with this, right, is that when I talk to the analysts and told them about this, they say it's a great thing, but they're most concerned about, can anybody guess? What are the analysts most concerned about? No. They are most concerned about how much money are we going to waste to do this. So there are three costs, right? The cost to serve is very low. A lot of this is straight through. So your incremental cost in getting any customer is very, very low. The cost to innovate for us, because we're not a very big bank by European standards, is also very low. We just plug in new fintech because we've exposed all the APIs. The biggest cost for us is cost to acquire. If it costs $200, right, to switch and make a customer transact, then 1 million customers is $200 million. 5 million customers is $1 billion Sing dollars. It's a lot of money. Most banks just pay enough to switch and not transact. If you don't transact, you don't get no data, this whole thing falls apart. Right? So that's the most difficult part. So to help that is one of many things that we're doing. We want to create the emotion around the brand. So let me show you what we did to do that. Obviously, it's very different. The colors, right? It's really a different kind of bank. We did a music video with the number 2, number 3, and number 4 artists on Joox, which is the equivalent of Spotify. And they did a song about tomorrow. The bank's called TMRW, short for tomorrow. And we had 11 million views in 2 weeks. I think it's 20 over million views now. Website visits, we got 120 of the social media influencers to be our ambassadors. So the marketing was done in a non-traditional way. And I'd like to show you a clip of kind of the brand positioning and see whether something that we use in Thailand could resonate in Europe. See how many of you get it. I know most of you are not millennials, but let's give it a try.
ถ้าพรุ่งนี้ Gen Y ครองโลก
You can find this online, by the way.
เดี๋ยววันนี้ทำงานวันแรกไม่ใช่เหรอ
ครับ
ไม่แต่งตัวอะไรของเธออะเสื้อยืดอะไรแบบเนี้ยไม่มีหรือไงที่มันดูแล้วไม่เครียดอะ
กาลเทศะนะแม่เดี๋ยวมันไม่สุภาพบอสน่ะอย่าให้เกียรติออฟฟิศ
ให้เกียรติอุณหภูมิประเทศเราก่อนไหมถ้าทำงานดีใครเขาจะไปว่าแต่งตัวแบบนี้แล้วมันฉลาดขึ้นเหรอ
รู้แล้วนะแม่
แล้วผมทรงอะไรอะเดี๋ยวก็ไม่มีเพื่อนคบหรอกมานี่
ของไร้สาระพวกเนี้ยไปถอดออกให้หมดเปลี่ยนชุดไป
ครับ
เกิดคนละเจน
เดี๋ยวกลับก่อนเจ้านายล่ะ
ทำไมต้องฝืนใช้โซลูชันเดียวกัน
ครับ
I like the last one. I don't know whether you caught it, but don't leave the office till your boss does. You should tell all your staff that. So this resonated very well because a lot of them felt that these are the situations I encounter every day. And the whole idea here was, how do you build a bank for the millennials? You have to make them identify that it's a different generation, so you need a different solution. And if your father banked with K-Bank, which is one of the most innovative banks in Thailand, you don't have to. So this was a way that we could then tie the emotive part, which is very hard, because banks are really not, it's very hard to be emotive about a bank, with a functional benefit so that we could make the chances of us being able to acquire customers fast, much cheaper. Thank you.
Wow. My question is, how can I become a Tomorrow customer? Can you come to Europe, please? That's
okay.
Really...
You need to move to Thailand and take up Thai citizenship because right now, in order to make it effortless, you need a Thai ID card. Otherwise, it goes back to paper, which is very tough. So you need a Thai ID card, you slot it in, put your finger, and then, it's just 8 minutes.
It's really great. I mean, I feel like it's so comprehensive. And in the beginning, you talked about, and we've heard this before, how millennials are looking for the experience rather than the ownership. And, my first question I wrote down was, how do you apply this to a savings account or a current account? But I feel like you really achieved this in, the whole customer experience in the app and everything. So well done. So before I ask my questions, are there anything? I feel like there's going to be a few.
Thank you. That was a really good presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have a question regarding your future engagement lab, and I'm sure everyone would be interested in that because I think everyone is trying to understand how they can develop their mobile banking app and how you need to work to be able to move faster and especially in your release cycle. So I think that would be really useful if you could tell us a bit more about how this future engagement lab is working.
So in order to engage customers, I think you need capabilities, insights, right? You need capabilities and insights. So we are able to measure the power of the insight. How many customers feel that this insight is good? And we created a very simple engagement index that we wanted to start very simple. You could easily make this a lot more complicated, but on the horizontal axis is your feedback to this insight, right? It could be on a scale of 1 to 5, for example. And then on the horizontal is the number of transactions you make. Obviously, if you make no transactions, you're not going to get any insight. So that's the dead zone. A lot of customers, in fact, in Asia, for any digital bank today, probably you get, if someone tells you they have 1 million customers, they have 5 to 10% activation rate, right? And then at the very top, the upper right, you've got high transaction and they like the insights. So the future of this is all about experimentation. You can easily see that you can't scale a digital bank because it's just too expensive. Unless you want to go for the unbanked, but there's other problems there in terms of KYC, how do you inject money, right? So the whole idea here is that it's a learning lab. Every day, the head of the engagement lab is coming and looking at what did we do, what kind of customers responded to this and their engagement index went up, what kind of customers didn't, and how do we do more. The idea in the end is to get advocates. If you get advocates and advocates are saying, look, even without anyone paying you, you should be a customer of this bank because this is how banking should be. So we're trying to create advocates in a hothouse, right, to accelerate the creation of advocates. If you don't have advocates, this thing is unaffordable. It's just not going to happen. And every bank, we believe, need to pass through this valley. It's the valley of the advocates. And we think that we're one of the earliest ones there, but many are going to come in, and then it's all about a battle for advocates. And you can see that we can keep increasing and improving the interface with more and more engagement capabilities. We are plugging in new. When we started, we're just using transactional data. We're now looking at fintechs that can merge web data that you can crawl with transactional data to make the insights even more powerful.
Another question?
Thank you very much, Dennis. Excellent presentation. Very interesting. You call it a bank for millennials. Does that mean that if I'm Generation Z, I have to look for another bank, or that the bank is going to grow up with the millennials, or is it in effect a youth bank, or how do you see it?
So it's a great question because it's often misunderstood even internally in UOB. The reason why we chose the millennial was they are going to be mono-channel. We didn't want omni-channel customers. Omni-channel customers are very expensive, right? And if you're not going to reduce costs and lower your cost to serve, you're already doomed because those 3 costs need to come down, otherwise you can't scale. But once we design around them and we know they're very tough customers because they really know usability, anyone who's young at heart can apply. I mean, unless you tell me you hate the colors, right? You can't stand these colors, then don't apply. But we're not restricting you. But you can think, if you think of it, right? If you have, because I was the consumer head of UOB in Singapore, I easily have 20 products. The interface will be much harder, right? We're trying to push this interface to the limit by making it simpler and simpler. I think we have some ways to go. Options, things you need to choose, all can be pre-filled. So it's going to take some time before it's good for the very complex customer because banks generally, as I mentioned earlier, in digital banking or in mobile banking, you defer to the most complex customer. And the simplest customer is disadvantaged by your interface.
If the TMRW would be the not only for the Thailand but also the ASEAN brand.
Yes.
Do you anticipate to include the multi-currency features and also the international remittance?
So we are very customer focused, right? We are not feature focused. Whenever someone asks me this kind of question, I will say, okay, let's go back to the customer. In ASEAN right now, because the GDP isn't high and you don't have the kind of migration of knowledge workers you have in Europe, my assessment currently is that the Revolut product will not be very successful except for domestic workers. There's a lot of domestic workers in ASEAN, but we're not targeting the domestic worker. We're targeting a young professional. Why? Because the lifetime value of the young professional is unmistakable. We will never lose money on the young professional. And there are enough young professionals who will go through several economic cycles with the growth of ASEAN. So we want to stay focused. When it works, we can easily apply it to multiple segments, but we don't want to get defocused, because when you get defocused, what happens? Does anybody know? You lose sight of the customer. You lose sight of who you are satisfying and who you're trying to make the experience better for, and then you become very muddled.
Great, thank you so much. In the interest of time, we'll move on, but please do
Thank you.
chat to
Thank
us
you very
if you
much.
have questions. Thank you.